This is Shane Gibson's podcast from closingbigger.net. Today's podcast is part 2 in a series I did with Mike Curliss, president of Maximizer CRM. I'm going to drop us right in the middle of our conversation here with Mike introducing himself, and then we're going to roll directly into really the difference between sales leadership and sales management, and actually why these two skill sets are both inseparable and vital to lead sales organizations and scale them effectively today. We're back for, I guess, what is episode 2 today.
Number 2.
With Mike Curliss from Maximizer, and of course myself, Shane Gibson, CEO, founder of Professional Sales Academy. I'm an author, sales leader, sales trainer, and spend most of my time actually divided between keynoting at conferences all over North America and globally on sales and sales technology, and then working kind of deep within organizations, helping them with their sales enablement. At least that's what I do. Mm-hmm. Mike, maybe you could introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Shane. Happy to be here. Mike Curliss at Maximizer. I've been in sales now for 25 plus years. I guess started early on in territory sales and sporting goods, and then kind of worked my way through large organizations like Sony and Ericsson, and I've been in software for about the last 10 or 15 years, and I've worked with companies to sort of ramp up and scale the organizations, and then have gone through a couple of exits that worked out really well. So that's kind of the experience that I bring to the table today.
Fantastic. Last time we looked at AI on the prize is for VPs of sales, senior sales leaders. How are we dealing with implementing and succeeding with AI? And today we're kind of taking a step back to maybe some more fundamentals of sales leadership versus sales management.
Yeah.
And what's the difference? What's better? Is there a better approach to leading or managing our team? And I think maybe I'll kick it off with just maybe from my perspective, what I see sales leadership versus sales management. Number one, I don't think it's either or, and I don't necessarily think it's different roles. No matter where we're at, we are both managing and leading. And so when I think of sales leaders, I think from a sales management perspective, sales managers build systems, manage systems, manage process, keep our people accountable daily, right? They're the front line that engage and empower and keep on track the sales team. They also build credibility and consistency. Now that's kind of, and I always think of the sales manager is living in the now, or at least a quarter in a lot of cases, right? That's what, and then from a sales leadership perspective, I think as a sales leader, leaders build a vision, or they communicate a vision, and they build people who execute the vision. So they're actually building people, they're building teams, and they're propagating that vision. And I also think that they're strategic, which means they're sort of seeing beyond the horizon. And so that's my, or able to see beyond or plan beyond the horizon, beyond the immediate, and keep the team focused on the big picture. So when we look at these two roles, we can think, what's more important, the sales managers or the sales leaders? But for me, I think it's a mix of both. But I'm curious from your perspective, what I've shared, my kind of view of what sales management is versus sales leadership. Does that resonate with you? Am I missing anything? What are your thoughts?
I think you're bang on, and probably in smaller organizations, people are doing both every single day.
Yeah.
So absolutely, as a manager, you kind of want to build the box and have people operate within that process box and do those deliverables. It's probably very focused on quarterly goals, KPIs, OKRs, those kind of things that you can put in place and then measure against and hold people accountable. I think on the leadership side, though, now you're getting more into the vision. Where is the company going? And I think too, at least the organizations I've worked at, is the executive team looks to the sales leader to have a big role in the product design and the product roadmap. You're the person out there talking to the prospects and gathering customer feedback, whether you're doing new customer acquisition or account management with the existing book of business, but you should know what's working and what's not working. So in addition to having a head of technology or a CTO, organizations are going to rely on your sort of leadership insights and skills and help them build where they want to go. And I would say, I would add to that too, by being very aware of market conditions, the competition, where things are going, and then leading the team or pivoting so that you're able to meet those challenging demands as they come up.
And I think leading the team and pivoting
Yeah.
is I think something that when I talk to like the C-suite, they're really looking for from their VP of sales or their head of sales, whatever that title is within the organization, their managing director if they're in the UK.
Yeah.
And they're looking for that capacity to really have that data at their fingertips and to be on it proactively and be pushing for the pivot versus reacting to the marketplace. And I think that is a key factor. And then it's part of change management. When I look at change management, traditional thought around change management is your senior executive, like a VP of sales, is the change sponsor.
Yeah.
And then the frontline salespeople, they're the changed, because that's where the behavior has to change.
You
right?
hope. You hope. Yeah.
You hope.
Yeah.
And the immediate sales management, which have both leadership and management activities, they're the change agents. They're the catalyst. They're the catalyst to actually push upon the front line. They're the ones that interact the most. And so I think as a VP of sales, being able to communicate that vision consistently and in a way that your team understands the direction they need to go and the steps needed to be taken is vital. And I think too often, at least I see, is they sit around and wait to hear from the board or the C-suite what's next.
Yeah.
And they're reacting
Yeah.
to senior management. And then they go, oh, senior management has this idea. They want us to go this direction, so I guess we're going this direction. And for me, that shows a lack of sales leadership, at least from my perspective, from the outside.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. If you think about startups, and I've worked at a couple where they've got a board, they've got investment, and now they're looking for traction, and they're leaning heavily on the sales leader to find that traction, so they know where to invest and where to double down. A lot of times, you might get a founder who's got a vision of where that product should go, but it's on your shoulders to find the market for it and then build the sales strategies that will deliver success for the investors.
Absolutely. So stepping back, and this was kind of the burning question, I remember sharing this with your team around this topic, and the question was, I'd like to know what's the difference between a sales manager versus sales leader.
Yeah.
And I think it is not a role, but as much a mode. And I think that is like key, that we need to do both. And I think there's more demand with sales leaders around what they need to do today with fewer resources. So we need to be inputting on the product roadmap, looking at the marketplace, building a sales strategy, collaborating with marketing, and then helping our frontline sales leaders develop themselves and lead the sales team.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there. And most of them, when I sit down with sales leaders who are feeling overwhelmed and I start to talk about what they should be doing, they're like, I know that.
Yeah.
But I'm not doing it because I'm buried. And so I think there's two things that to solve a business problem. You either throw process at it or people at it, right? And process comes in the form of something that's driven by technology. So I'm curious, with this conundrum, this leadership challenge of being overwhelmed, how does a tool like CRM help them with that?
Yeah, well, I think, listening to the question, probably the first constraint that you're up against is you just can't throw people at a problem, either because the problem can't be solved with more manual resources, or you don't have the budget to just add people. So that's why a lot of organizations then look to a CRM. So a CRM can come into a company and it can sort of put structure to a process. So I always say, and you and I have talked about, you have to have a pretty good idea of what process you want to implement before you just implement the technology.
Yeah.
But once you have that, you can implement a CRM. And the CRM can be that sort of foundational piece, that structure where all the data is contained, and kind of maybe bringing it back to sales leader versus sales manager. If you set that up correctly, and all the data is being fed into it, and people are following the processes, that all gets escalated into dashboards or analytics, these kind of things. And as a manager, that's critical, so you can see what's going on, obviously. But then as a sales leader, if you're going into the boardroom, you better know your activities, what's working, what's not working, know your numbers. So that CRM, I think, provides that critical insight that leadership requires.
Data-based insights.
Very data-based.
Not gut, or I think we're here, or,
no.
Well, my team has forecasted, and I think we can hit this number.
Yeah.
And then the pushback is based upon what?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, was that a question or?
Yeah, it kind of is a thought. It's like, so how does CRM help me with that?
Well, the pushback on CRMs is reps usually don't want to put the data in there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or they put in half accurate data type thing. And so when you are, whether I think sales manager or leader, you're going into your CRM and you're looking for trends. You're trying to do accurate forecasting and you're trying to predict certain things. If you don't have good data in the CRM, then you're not going to have the ability to do that accurately at all.
So putting on your sales leadership hat and your sales management hat, either one, probably a combination of both, what can you do to create a culture where your team is capturing better data more consistently across the board on all their deals, even the ones they don't quite want to put in there yet?
Yeah.
How do you rail against? What have you seen that's worked to change that culture?
Well, I think it starts at the top with sales leadership, and so if you insist that certain things will be in the CRM, then they have to be in there. And I can go into other times about how to do that in a CRM. I think the other thing though that you want to do, and we talked about this, is you want to have tools that help the sales team make it easier on them to get that information in there. So if you've had a conversation, most people, they don't want to spend an hour writing the notes in the CRM. If you have an AI tool that helps them get that information, and then another one that helps the sales leader amalgamate that type of information, and now I can see the key metrics or the key themes, then I can start acting upon that data.
So like a tool like a Fathom or a Gong or a Chorus AI, it listens to your conversation, captions the whole thing. It'll actually, through various prompts, organize it based on the type of meeting, drops it into your CRM, and then you can take that information and pull it all together as a sales leader and figure out what's going across multiple conversations.
Yeah,
right?
Well, I think that's another request that sales leaders have to be competent with now is what technology are you going to buy for your organization? And you're usually the person going to the CEO or the board asking for the money.
Yeah.
So, being very, you called it the TQ,
Yeah.
being very technically up to date with what tools do you need to augment your sales process to drive those efficiencies.
Yeah. So, and again, it was a bit of a leading question in this conversation. It's just like my vision is that in order for us to do all the things expected of us as sales leaders today, or me as a business owner, it just can't be manual anymore.
No.
There's so many activities, so many interactions, so many levels of engagement that we need to tie it together with a true sales leader driven CRM, complemented with AI, and then with the backbone of that is still really good sales coaching and management processes. We need to have the fundamentals nailed down as well.
We do, and again, I think a CRM can help point you in the right direction. So at Maximizer, we like to use AI to surface opportunities that might be going off course a little bit, and the idea is it can bubble that up to the sales manager, if that's who's working with the rep, to say, here's an area or an opportunity that you should probably go and look into and start coaching. So you can be more effective as a sales manager and then get that deal to the finish line. And depending on how you set up your CRM, that could be all sorts of things. It can be anything from opportunities, but it could be activity based as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the leadership topic, I know this is something that we wanted to chat about, and that was, and this is the ongoing debate. A lot of sales people can also be offended by this one, and this is, you had this question earlier, is do we promote our top salespeople to management? What are the pros and cons of doing this? Is it a bad practice? What are your thoughts on that initially?
I think it's generally a different skill set that makes you a top producer versus manager, and still a different one as a sales leader.
Yeah.
So, and I think it also depends on the industry that you're in, because different industries require different skill sets out of a
good point.
salesperson, right? Some can be very sort of lone wolf mentality, others are more team structure and all that kind of stuff. So I think when I'm promoting somebody, I'm not necessarily looking for the person who always hits the target or overachieves. I'm looking for a more rounded out portfolio of skills to promote you into management. Does that? I mean,
it resonates with with me, and I think it was interesting around what industry, because there are different industries. There's, an extension of that is should your sales manager carry a quota?
Yeah.
That's another question. Maybe we can talk about that, because I think it gets in the way with what sales management and sales leadership is, because we're competing with our team.
That's right.
And we're now, we're getting away to the multiplier effect. The multiplier effect of leadership is building other leaders.
That's exactly it.
And so instead of I should be sharpening your axe, not showing you, hey, I can still chop a tree. Like, I think the fact that old school thought process where, oh, the sales manager has to close stuff to have credibility to lead the team, I think that mentality, is pretty old. Sure, maybe sometime in their sales career, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's a whole total different skill set. When I look at the different skill sets, it's a psychology. Like a really good key account salesperson, in my opinion, is selfish. You're my boss. You're like, I'd like you to come in on this meeting, and I'm like,
that's right.
No.
Yeah. Yes.
What do you mean? I'm your boss.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
You don't pay me to do meetings. You pay me to go sell. I'm not participating. Well, it's going to help the team. Well, it's just not going to help my pay.
Yeah.
And you're like, this guy's kind of rude, but he's our biggest closer. He protects his time. He'll suck resources from other part in the company and get help here and there to get a deal done.
Yep.
And it's about them doing it, which I think is an awesome personal drive, and I've been looking for that in a top salesperson. But that self-focused behavior or mindset is the opposite of what's needed in sales management. And it's like you said, I'm looking for not just the more well-rounded person, but it's like who on the team really understands and follows process, like all our processes, from a management perspective. And then on the leadership skills, who's naturally coaching other people on the team, even if I don't ask them to? Who's helping the new rep and answering a question there, being helpful and sharing something they did to help them win? That for me is the person who's ripe to move up, because, they're probably not the top performer because they are out there coaching everybody else, and spending time doing other things, but they get the whole organization. They've got good, Christine Van, who's head of sales for Red Bull in Canada here, friend of mine, and she talks about having a strong personal brand internally to get things done. And I think a good sales leader has a good, strong internal personal brand. They understand the importance of actually building cross-departmental relationships too. So that's who I would promote if I was going to promote a salesperson, in many cases.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Very successful salespeople can be, like you said, selfish, and they tend to sort of not follow the rules.
Yeah.
And they're not really dying to put all their information in the CRM. If anything, they're rather protective of that. But I was thinking what you said about sales leadership and what differentiates it from sales or sales management. You have to have those cross-departmental relationships and build trust.
Yeah.
So if you are going to the CTO and you're asking for changes in a product roadmap, they have to be able to trust you. Same thing, if you're designing compensation plans or working with marketing on pricing strategy, finance has to be able to trust you and that you're going to implement what's not just best for the sales team, but what's best for the organization as a whole. Yeah,
putting the organization ahead of your team, that's a really important piece. And I think on the sales manager, it's almost a little bit different. Frontline sales manager, their role is to fight for their team.
Advocate for the team.
Advocate for the team, right? And the sales leader has to be a bit more pragmatic about that, which is kind of an interesting piece. So talking about top down or bottom up, forecasting. So, we already know that like close to half of sales leaders, their whole teams, don't hit forecast annually now. And I think the average salesperson is around the same. Like, half of salespeople or even more aren't hitting quota. I have a theory personally on why some of this is happening, and they call it endemic in the sales world that we no longer hit quotas. But is it really because we're worse at selling? Like, is it really? Cause I don't think it is. So I'm just top down, bottom up. What's your thought on setting quotas for sales teams?
I guess I would go back to my days at Sony, and top down and bottom up were relatively easy to implement. So you would get a top down organizational quota. This is the quota for whatever, Canada, let's say. And then I would have the sales team work with our distribution channels, and we'd build a bottom up forecast. And then I would always say the stuff in the middle is what you have to work on, whether through channel promotions, market. Yeah, exactly. Pretty straightforward stuff. If you're talking about younger companies and SaaS companies and startup and that kind of stuff, very difficult to do a bottom-up forecast. It's hard for a rep who's in charge of new customer acquisition to give you a bottom-up forecast. I always joke, like, we haven't met the people yet that we're going to sell to 4 months from now. We don't know who they are. So that's very difficult. So it tends to be more of a bottom or a top-down forecast, I think, for that, to put those targets in place. But back to your question about quotas in theory, because we've talked about this.
Yes.
Right? Do you take a number, say it's $1 million from the executive level, and do you turn that into, well, it's actually $1.2 million for the sales team, and then divvy up the quota, and everybody gets an inflated quota, so that you've got some padding built into the organization.
Yeah, by the time, even though your company goal is $1 million, if you added up all your sales quotas for your sales team, it would be $2 million.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like there could be 100% increase in what the sales team is supposed to deliver compared to what the CEO wants to deliver to the bottom line, to the shareholder, let's say.
That's right.
And that's why the CEO is not nearly as concerned as even the VP of sales when they hear, oh, half the team isn't meeting quota. Because they're looking at the top line revenues and going, we're fine.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you've got a deflated sales team who was hired on one income promise, and when they realize we've never done that, or the expectation puts a certain pressure on them. So I've got some thoughts on, I understand why they do it. Everybody tops it up a bit, they pass it down. And the goal is to give people a stretch goal so that even if they only get 75% of the way there, we've put enough pressure on them that we'll hit our number, right? And I think there's some more positive ways to do that, where if we want them to overproduce, it can be actually baked into compensation.
That's right.
And you had some ideas around that before on how we can do that maybe a little bit differently. We give them a more reasonable number, but we incentivize them to perform not with a stick.
With the carrot.
With a carrot, right?
Yeah, with accelerators, once you've hit target and now you're above target and overachieving. So for me, the best place I can be is ahead of target halfway through a quarter.
Yes.
Because now I know I'm in the accelerators. And once you do that, I think it actually motivates more behavior, because as a rep, or a manager who's ever compensated that way, that for every dollar you're bringing in, you're making incrementally more commission.
Yes.
And now you're going to work even harder and faster. Versus I'm in the hole, I begin every day way behind target.
I got to do something or I'm in trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And so
I'm going to end up with as a red line on the board.
Yep. Yeah,
and I've been there 3 weeks in a row.
You don't want to be the bottom guy every time, right?
Yeah.
So I just think my management philosophy on that type of thing is to be more transparent, to be aligned with what the sales targets are and the budgets and all that kind of stuff. Plus, then you don't have to have 2 or 3 different sets of targets that you're tracking towards.
So I've got a client who works top down and bottom up. So they have a little bit of that inflated goal, or they like to call them stretch goals. And I've seen them actually hit these stretch goals where they set some really high bars for growth, and their sales team was like, we had our biggest year last year, how are we having the same growth or more this year? And the CEO's like, I think we can do this. But then they take the time to, because they're using a proper CRM and they know their steps and they've got a process and a playbook, they go, okay, last year with 700 leads, you hit $1 million in revenues.
Exactly, yeah.
So, because we know this, because we know your personal conversion metrics. So I know if I give you 1,000 leads, because as your sales leader, I promise I'm giving you 1,000 leads, you will hit like $1.2 million, whatever it is, right? And so the proof is visible to the salesperson, right? They're like, okay, so if I keep up my part of the bargain and I behave like I did last year, I know I can get there.
Yeah.
Or the conversation is, Mike, which means whatever you were doing from a prospecting perspective, we need you to turn that up by 30%.
Yeah.
Right? And let's time management and strategize it. But what they do is they, on an individual rep by rep level, based upon their personal numbers, not the team's averages, what are they really capable of? And so some people in the team are getting a 10% bump and others are getting a 50% based upon what they know they're capable of.
Yeah.
As far as activities and paying them accordingly. And I think being more strategic that way, you can't do that unless you have the data and you record it. And then you perfect best practices. There was another way you talked about this before, not on camera, but you mentioned the other way, not just to optimize the process, is also to increase the average deal size.
Yeah, I mean, I think a perfect use of a CRM. So you have a sales team of 10 people. Not everybody is going to do everything the same.
No.
So if I can look and say that person A is successful here but needs a little bit of coaching there, and by tweaking those metrics and coaching and doing things maybe a little bit differently, we can change the outcome. But what I liked about what you said, though, is I think it's also incumbent on sales leaders and sales management to arm the sales reps with what do you need.
Yeah.
You just can't turn up the dial without then working together to say, well, we can do this, or we can do this or that.
Yeah.
And generally speaking,
by the way, your quota goes up 50%.
Yeah.
Put your plan together.
Yeah.
I'll see you in a week.
Yeah, and it just can't be more activity.
Yeah.
More activity. So it can be the things that we talked about, getting better at certain areas. I think working with other departments for an ask on marketing programs, collateral, demos, trials, all these type of things that assist in the sales process. And then the big one is always
adding stuff to your product roadmap.
Adding things, upsells.
Better add-ons and upsells, right?
Yeah.
So you giving them the tools to sell, the marketing collaterals, the positioning, investing in a couple extra conferences or trade shows. Like
all that stuff.
You have to meet them there.
Yeah,
right?
and just on your last point though, it's always, in my opinion anyway, a lot of fun when you close big deals.
Yes.
Because those are the things that can be transformative for an organization when it lands, like say an A player or something like that. Not only do you benefit from the revenue and potentially that name on your webpage, but also your organization has to get better to meet that organization at that level.
Yeah. So in closing those big deals too, that's the lagging indicator, like the dollar value.
Yeah.
And I think that the other piece is that we do spend a lot of time on the metrics and the dashboards, I think too much on like what's come through the pipeline dollar-wise, and not maybe those leading indicators. And I'd be curious from your perspective, like what do you think some of the more important leading indicators are for, let's say, a business-to-business organization that's selling large deals? What are some of the more important leading indicators for you?
Well, it's a good question. So a guy I used to work with had that great analogy that a closed deal being a lagging indicator is kind of like a kid coming home with their homework and getting a D or an F, let's say. And you can't, I subscribe to it, you can't manage the outcome itself, right? No. You can only manage the activity. So in that case, perhaps working with your child to say more study, better habits, those kind of things would affect the outcome. So with leading indicators, which again, should be in your sales process.
Yeah.
So take some basic ones. Number of new customer meetings held in a week, right? You can't have an opportunity in a closed won deal until you meet a new customer.
Yeah.
And so or new prospect, how many of those are you having? An easy one is demos booked, demos delivered, those kind of things. It could be proposals sent, that kind of stuff. Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of activities that you can track, but I would say track the big ones. And I think, first touch point is a big one kind of thing. Because you can do all that email activity and all that kind of stuff, and that's a lot of activity. But what's really driving the opportunity creation?
Yeah, and I see it's interesting because it isn't about just the number of emails. For me, the hardest thing for a salesperson, and even for me, my outbound marketing efforts using AI and whatnot, what is the purpose of all that? Purpose is to have the first conversation.
Yeah.
Or just the reply by email. Or by LinkedIn inbox, right? I say, hi Mike, I acknowledge you exist. Thanks for connecting, right?
Yeah.
Then you have that, so that first conversation is like the first KPI. I don't care about how many leads you have in the funnel, how many calls you made, how many emails you sent, how many new LinkedIn connections you have, how many trade shows you've attended, how many first conversations you've had. And then the second one for me is how many well-executed discovery conversations. Yeah. And this is where we get from quantitative versus qualitative versus quantitative KPIs. So KPI is I did a first meeting. That's a quantitative KPI. Qualitative is I executed these specific steps and I got this information out of it. That's what actually I want to track in my CRM. I want them to be able to check that box off and say, I listened more than I talked. I asked our 5 core questions. I identified their 3 big drivers and I closed the next step. That for me is a KPI, because I know if I do that, 3 out of 5 of those precipitate into a closed contract in 2 weeks from now.
That's right.
But if I just say I did it, but the conversation was 20 minutes long, I talked the whole time, and I didn't sell them on the next step, that's really not a leading indicator. That's a leading indicator of a non-deal. So I think this is the other thing we can do is build into our CRM as sales leaders more qualitative aspects of our KPIs. Because when someone says, I did 20 outbound calls.
Yeah.
Did you leave voicemails? What time of day did you call? Was it to the right person?
Yeah, well, we talked about this last time, and how can I use AI to help me as a sales leader
Yeah.
So great, you had a good discovery call and everybody had a good discovery call, but I need to see the amalgamation of that and what was said.
How long was it? How much did you talk?
Keywords, competition mentions, all these type of things. You talk about how a great sales rep will mention the next step 2 or 3 times during a call.
Yeah.
Are the other reps doing that kind of stuff? And as a sales manager or leader, you're not going to be on every call and you're not going to listen to every recording. So how can AI supplement that to surface that information for you?
Well, it's also Captain Trevor Green, who I wrote my first book with, Closing Bigger. One of my favorite quotes from him, and of course he's got military background, is what's inspected gets respected, right? It's a very military saying, but I like it because if I know that my sales leader is watching the qualitative aspects of my calls and using AI to do it, I'm less likely to skim through and not ask the questions. I'm more likely to be thorough because I know that it's being measured. Where I think in the past, no one measured a conversation, right? They just, did you do it, right? But now there's the opportunity to, for it to be inspected and also improved, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really, important piece. So
I was going to add one thing on leading metrics too.
Yeah.
So depending on how long your sales cycle is, a friend of mine has a great quote. So pick a month. August is coming up. If your sales cycle is longer than 30 days, your August is already done.
Yeah.
You just maybe don't know it. So August sales results are dependent on what you did in July and June and May. So if you've identified those leading indicators and those become activity targets for your team that you need to do X amount of very thorough discovery calls, and you need to do it 60 days before it becomes a win, then you can coach and manage out here versus waiting for that poor August sales result has a lagging indicator.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think that depending on the size of the deal and the type of prospecting you do, your leading indicators, like for me, some of my leading indicators in my business have to happen now for 2026.
Yeah.
Right? It's 2024 now, 2026. So I think about content marketing, where I've put out a ton of content. I saw as I doing talks on AI for sales back in 2018, no one cared.
Yeah.
ChatGPT comes out, and all of a sudden everybody else is
cares.
really geeking out along with me. So I thought I got to polish this off. I want to do keynotes on this topic.
Yeah.
So I started creating short form content on the internet a year ago and writing blog posts upon it that are only starting to pay now as far as deals go. So in a lot of our networking, even our prospecting is like that as salespeople. I'm reaching out to a key decision maker or a company. I'm figuring out what's going on there. I realize that their product life cycle, or they're using a competitor, that's not up for another 9 months. And so I have to have a lot of foresight in those leading activities. And so I think, it might not even be in, what I'm getting at is it might not even be July to August. It's often, I know for my business, what I did in October, November will impact what happens in June and September, right? And so if you, as a sales leader, don't track those leading indicators, you don't realize until 9 months too late that salesperson is never going to hit quota.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I like to say that it's when you're looking at a forecast or a funnel outlook, and there's always that big bar that is whatever 90 days out. So month 1, month 2, month 3, that big bar. But does that bar ever come forward, or is it just like the mirage on the sand that you're always crawling towards because people want to park those deals out there?
Keeps moving because they're not doing the fundamentals.
They're not doing the things that we need to do today, and probably the right things at the right time to move those deals forward.
So this is, I think, sort of right on point with my next question or topic is, how do we drive these right activities? We talk about the importance of doing them, but how do we drive people to do them? Like the right KPIs, follow the right process, and have the right focus. Like what are some of the things we can do to help with that?
Yeah, well, I guess it starts probably at the sales leader. So when we're talking about promoting people, you should have people that are competent in those positions that are able to map that stuff out. I think align the right technology, but not overbuy on the technology side. Get that in place, the management, of course, and now we get to sort of determining what's been working and what's not working, and making sure, if we're talking a lot about the sales manager role, I would say, that person mapping out, this is what our process is going to be. Let's go to market with that. Yeah. Let's measure if it's not working, where do we need to change that process and try it again. And I guess in that case, I'm kind of putting on my startup hat as we launch and try to find traction and that kind of stuff. I think if you're in a very mature business, then you have a lot of that stuff in place already. And it's probably a fine tuning or it's hiring the right people and then coaching them to do those certain things and helping them understand that by doing this here, this activity, whatever it is, or coaching them, to your point, how to conduct a great discovery call, right? And this is what you're looking for. And then when you hear these things, this is how our product matches that need.
I think to tie onto that, it is really about, I love to say is that, like, I'm a pretty emotional guy. So if I have like a good sales week this week, next week I am fearless and I'm out there and I'm wanting to do more activity and I just want more winning. And then if I have like a prospect ghost me and someone was mean to me and someone delays cutting a deal to the next quarter, now I don't want to call anybody. And if I'm running my sales process off a list and my emotions, that list might not get touched that week. But if I'm running my sales process off of specific steps in my CRM that are popping up for me to do, they're scheduled, and I'm living my sales process and I'm living by my calendar, not my emotions, I'm going to be more consistent. And so I think for me is I'm going to be doing my quarterly business reviews with my sales team about how they're doing based upon what I see their calendar, not what they told me they did, but what actually happened in their calendar. And I'm going to be rewarding partially based upon their capacity to walk through the steps in the CRM and check the boxes up, and the fact that they're managing their time effectively based upon what their calendar looks like. And I think if the team realizes that there's an expectation that they drive their process and they live within the CRM or the calendar, I can help them be more consistent, right? But if CRM is just a place for postmortems, or I just record what I did, versus what I'm going to do, I think this is where the real opportunity is rewarding that, and even having maybe some of their compensation or awards around actually being consistent with process.
Especially depending on your role. Some roles might be much more process oriented, like an SDR. Something like that, and depending how you set up your CRM at Maximizer, we have a really cool thing called the activity tracker. And that's just a high-level dashboard of what everybody did, and I can break it down and see it by person or type of activity. I can see what they did last week, what they're doing this week, and what they've got scheduled in the upcoming weeks. And as a leader, you can sit down and go, you might be a little light in this area, knowing that you better do it today because a win is 45 or 90 days down the road type thing. And most salespeople generally aren't overly excited to do cold calling and those kind of things. So if you have activity targets, you have to calendar block your time. And then as a manager, you can see you're not doing this, or you need to focus on that. And I guess I would just add to your point about being emotional. Like, I think a lot of salespeople are. So I always joke, like, the best time for a win is right after a win. Like,
100%.
Don't knock off that day. Keep going.
Pick up the phone.
That's right. Pick up the phone. You get confidence. That's right.
Follow up on some
Keep
deals.
Going. Yeah, that's
absolutely. The other one, when I look at moving the needle, is great. We've got all these KPIs in place. One of the ways to enhance KPI or people doing the right thing is to reward them through recognition. So, one way, of course, is like a gold star on the leaderboard, so to speak, right? Or I've got one client that, every time they book a certain type of meeting, they get a Starbucks gift card. Like, it doesn't cost the company a lot, and that particular client might be worth, 6 or 7 figures to the company later on. And you would think, well, would really a $100 gift certificate, would that really excite them? But it's the recognition and the bragging rights. And the other one I've seen work well, which I've done with some long-term clients, is we had a team of advisors. There was 22 of them across the province, and taking the top performers. The top performers never are good at the whole process.
No.
There's something they're really good at, and some stuff they kind of fluff, right? We all do this, right? There's parts of the process I'm not awesome at. But we identified who on the team was good at one process. One person was great at booking meetings. Another one was incredible at discovery. Another person was really fantastic at the handover to the other division. So what we did is we would hold webinars, but we would make them the hero. So one of us would interview that top rep on how they execute that well. And it would put so much fire in their belly to do more of it. Because once they were pulled up as an example of like how to do an awesome discovery call, you'd notice like they do them better. Right? And so even that recognition and making them kind of part of the leadership, teaching the rest of the team can work as well. So that kind of moves into coaching. is one of the big gaps I see is that sales leaders will say, yeah, I know one-on-ones are important. Well, how do you do them? Well, I do them when I can. So what do you say to your salespeople? Like when you say prospecting is important, is it okay when they say to you, I do it when I can?
Yeah.
They're like,
no. I mean, there's certain things that just need to be fundamental on how you operate. So again, just speaking of my own personal sort of management philosophy, I have one-on-ones with everybody every week. And they don't, right? And they rarely move. Like I get it if you have a doctor's appointment or something like that, but like it's consistent.
That's fantastic.
And if you're leveraging the data out of the CRM, then you can come to those conversations much more informed. And I think to your point about leaders and leadership and top reps. So one of the things that we have at Maximizer is a leaderboard, but it's also fundamentally underneath it powered by AI.
Yeah.
So who is doing the right things that lead to the best outcomes? And if you're in sales, you should probably be competitive.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't want to be at the bottom of that leadership board very often. So, by having it visible to everybody and transparent.
The activities, not just the dollars.
Exactly, the activities and the outcomes. And it can help you in your coaching to say, look, Shane is killing it on his discovery calls. Let's have Shane talk about what he does. Or, Mike is doing a great job on demos. Why don't we listen into some of Mike's calls and his recordings to see what he's doing? So while that visibility can be a little unsettling to some people, it's also an opportunity to learn and improve.
Rewarding.
Yeah.
And it bubbles up, as we talked about earlier, maybe some of those teacher leaders that are fit for moving into management.
Yeah.
Because they love mentoring and they love helping their team and they understand process and they buy into it.
That's right.
That's also a good testing ground, right? To give them little opportunities, I shouldn't say little, they're big opportunities in a concise period of time to help grow the team, right? And that starts helping you build some lieutenants, right?
Which you need.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So reactive versus proactive in sales and account management. And I think this is a big one I think I cannot talk about this enough is what does reactive versus proactive sales behavior look like? Why is it so important to create a culture of proactivity within our sales team? I've got my ideas around reactive versus proactive sales culture, but does anything come to mind when I bring that up from a salesperson's perspective or even account manager's perspective?
Yeah, I think I'd pick up on it from the account management side. So I look after our customer account team. So we have thousands of customers at Maximizer that are coming up for renewal all the time. And just as a general customer of anything, I think you need to have more of a relationship than you just get that bill once a year.
Yes.
Because if you're not talking to your customers, probably the competition is. And they're saying all sorts of things and offering all sorts of inducements to leave your current partner, in case of me, CRM, to go to another one. So it's very, very important, I think, that you have really defined proactive touch points with your key customers. And those, kind of like we're talking about with the one-on-ones, those should be written in cement. You need to be checking in, even if you think things are going well.
Yeah.
Who knows? There can be we've talked about this.
They can go better though.
They can go better. They might have an idea of how to improve your system, whatever it is that you're selling to them. Or people change and technology changes. We talk a lot about AI.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm thinking if I was a customer of Maximizer, I would very much want to know your product roadmap and how are you leveraging AI to empower sales leaders and sales managers and help us drive more revenue. That's where we focus at Maximizer. If you're whatever type of customer you are these days, AI is everywhere. And so I think just having those regular touch points and also varying them as well. So you need to do training and outreach and executive engagement and all those type of things. And they have to be proactive with your organization. I mean, otherwise the reactive is we're not going to renew. And by then 100%. It's too late.
Yeah. And it's the difference between, it was in the financial services space in the banking industry. I remember a stat a number of years ago, and to be honest, I can't remember the exact stat, but what they shared is significantly is that a totally satisfied customer was something like 3 to 5 times more likely to renew than just a satisfied customer.
Wow.
And the differentiator between totally satisfied and satisfied in financial services was proactivity. Was my bank and my financial manager proactive with me, right? And so I got a promotion this year. They know that because it showed up on LinkedIn, and they're connected with me, and they proactively reached out to see how my financial situation has changed. They congratulate me, and then realize that I've got some investment issues, and I've got a pension that's got to move over, and they learn these things proactively versus just waiting for me to reach out and pick up the phone and go, hey, I got a new job. And that is, a big differentiator between the size of the deal. We talked about the size of the deal, growing the size of a deal. You cannot grow deal size without proactivity. They don't just fall in your lap. Often you get a core offering and you need to ask the right questions, assess the client needs, expand their vision, get to know them better, and be proactive with the fact that you need to know 5 people in that company, not 1. And then that's what creates the opportunity. So I think that, proactivity is also about creativity. Right, and curiosity.
Sure.
Right, and so when we look at that, now let's translate that into leadership, because I think that's the final piece that when I'm talking to senior leaders about what they want out of their lieutenants, their VPs, their senior vice presidents, they're looking for someone who's proactive. They're not waiting for the CEO to tell them, I think we need a strategy on this. I think we should talk about moving into new markets. And so how does that manifest? What does a proactive VP of sales look like?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a lot of the things we touched on. So you are fundamentally the voice of the customer, your customers today, but also the voice of your future customers. And so how are you going to meet that future need? And so for us, it might be like we're talking about implementing AI systems into a CRM. When you talk about financial advisors, we also deal with financial advisors, and they do exactly the things that you talk about. They need to proactively reach out to their customers, so ensuring that our CRM supports their activity.
Yes.
So I kind of look at the leader as bringing that type of information to the executive level and plotting that. And I guess you could take the reverse of that. If you're not in those meetings and product is going down some roadmap that's not necessarily having future traction, then you're not going to be in business very long. I think the other thing, though, I've always had a good relationship with the head of finance, which is kind of a weird thing for somebody in sales to say. But you have to know your numbers, and you have to know your metrics, and you have to know your profitability. Those are all key things. And if you can speak knowledgeably at the executive level about all that stuff, then when you come with a pricing recommendation or a packaging or a discount program that you want to roll out, you've kind of got that trust at the executive level. So kind of proactively feeding that information into whoever you report to, the CEO or the board. And the thing about software, there's a million metrics, right? There's a whole periodic table of SaaS metrics. So pick the ones that are important to you, but then focus on them and watch where they're going and where they're trending, and sort of try to predict where things are going well and where things might have a bit of an issue, and then getting involved in those things before it's too late.
That covered a lot of ground.
Did I?
You did, which is
Okay.
great. And
All
I'm
right.
thinking the piece that I see in here is the other version of proactivity, and you already talked about, like knowing where the market's going and anticipating it, and then being proactive in my own self-education. So like if I decide that certain applications of AI are going to impact our industry, I don't want to wait to play catch up with competitors or have my senior team ask me, so what are you doing? You let the senior team go, hey, by the way, I just signed up for this conference that McKinsey's doing on generative AI and sales. I'm going. I'm bringing the team with me. Oh, okay. So I'm getting out ahead of this, right? And then the other piece, proactivity, is proactive people development. So even understanding like what is a solid sales management competency map with, let's say, my 5 lieutenants or whatever we want to call them, the people I'm developing with my team. And then, great, where are they at from 1 to 10 in each of the major areas? And then what's my game plan to build them up over the next year? So that I actually have a proactive team development plan, or these aren't my horses. Like I actually need to, and this is actually the other one is, I think proactive leaders have a talent funnel.
That's right.
They have a talent pipeline. They have more talent out there they could plug into the organization. They're not losing salespeople or middle sales management, and then sort of desperately trying to backfill with no networking game plan. So the other one is, I think, is being proactive in people development, but also in talent pipeline. And that's something where, again, back to what you talked about, was sometimes it means partnering with HR proactively, right? Doing those types of things.
I think
So,
just on that point, to me, that's always been the most rewarding part of the job, is seeing people grow
yes.
and promote them. And I guess it's, there's two paths. You want to promote your own team. And to do that, that means that you have to be training them and coaching them and giving them exposure to things like sales training, for example, so that they can grow and develop. And it's awesome to see that happening. And then as organizations grow, those opportunities might open up. So all of a sudden we need another sales manager or another director of renewals or something like that. So that's really, really interesting. And then you're right, if you have those contacts of people that you've worked with in the past that can come to your organization and bring that skill set and probably leadership, at least management.
Yes.
And people can see, yep, okay, that's going to help me. I want to work with that person and see where it goes from there. And it reminds me a quick little story. We talked about it the other day, but I first bought Maximizer in 2004 at Sony. And I had a rep working for me. And chances are he might see this, so I'll be very careful in a good way. But we had employment contracts back then, and his employment contract was coming up for renewal. And he was like acting like a free agent and asking for more money, which is great. This is probably a good thing in a salesperson.
Yes.
They're not afraid to negotiate on the money side. Anyway, we didn't have Maximizer, so all this was in that person's head. All the contacts and locations and data, sales data, and all that kind of stuff. So ended up renewing his contract, and then I went out and bought my first CRM.
Because you were held hostage
That's
by
right. I was held
sales
hostage.
talent.
Yeah, and but I always admired his confidence in negotiating. Anyway, just to bring that all back around, he's now a director at Apple. Like, he's gone on to have a great career.
Yes.
And like, to me, that's the most rewarding thing. That was the first sales job he had, and he's gone on to have a great career.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
I think that's a good kind of endpoint to wrap on, and that is that we go back to leadership. We talk about what's the difference between sales leadership and sales management. Management is that tactical day-to-day accountability, managing systems, processes, refining them, giving people the support, implementing the change that's driven in a positive way, protecting our team. Right? Those are management skills. But then we move into the leadership, and it's right what you finished with is it's actually about truly having the skill set and having the values where you have joy in building and developing people, even if it means they build to a point where they leave and they succeed somewhere else.
Sure.
And I think that's the true attribute of the leader is they're building other leaders. They're not just managing a process, right?
That's right.
And they have a vision beyond the horizon.
Yeah.
And then you tie that all in, they're juggling a lot. They need the right technology to support them in that process so they can do more of the human stuff, right?
I think that's been a theme of our discussions. It's that AI, the blend of technology and humanity. But at the end of the day, people work for the managers that they like and trust, not AI.
Absolutely.
So that I think is the real sales leadership.
Yeah. And they, the old adage, right? People don't quit companies; they quit their manager.
That's right.
But there's a lot of truth to that. Not all the time, right? Sometimes people have a great manager and they have a great opportunity somewhere else. The company's not going their direction. But a lot of cases, that immediate relationship is the most important one. And it's where the change happens as well, right?
Yeah.
So this has been an awesome conversation. Again, Maximizer.com if you want to connect with Mike and his team. You can find me at salesacademy.ca and pretty well at Shane Gibson on any platform.